So, just to get us started here, where did you get the idea for the Laundry Files? This idea of like insane alien monsters coming through other dimensions, coupled with an IT guy who is afraid about what the reception his expense reports are going to get.
I'm trying to think myself back into my frame of mind in 1998, which is when I began writing it. I actually have to go back a bit further to 1992, when I began writing a short story which eventually surfaced, titled A Colder War. It was a Lovecraftian short story, and I began writing it, not coincidentally, about 18 months after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now, I'm older than I look. I lived through a chunk of the Cold War, and the 1980s were a terrifying time to be a teenager. I think a lot of my generation actually had PTSD from it, because we just knew that vast, cool intelligences on the far side of the planet might at any moment decide to melt our faces for some abstruse ideological disagreement. And it seemed to me that Lovecraft's nightmares had become kind of kitsch and cliched by the 1990s. You know, you could get Cthulhu bedroom slippers. But at the same time, they're a very powerful metaphor for existential cosmic dread. And in A Colder War, I set out to write a kind of sequel to Lovecraft's novella, At the Mountains of Madness, set in an alternate world where the aftermath of the Peabody expedition, described in At the Mountains of Madness, was a very deplorable gold rush of various national governments sending their archaeologists, think Indiana Jones-ish, to loot all the tech they can find from the old ones and the elder race, and a crypt containing a sleeping elder god called Cthulhu, this sort of thing. And the Nazis are in it, the Soviet Union is in it, the US government is in it. At the end of the Second World War, the Nazi necromantic tech is divvied up, and we get into a Cold War situation where, rather than it just being nuclear weapons pointed at each other, there are these vast alien godlike beings. And the story went very, very, very grim, very, very fast. Keeps being republished in anthologies because, well, World War III takes place 2/3 of the way into the story. It's narrated by some of the survivors. Well, they may have survived. And I wanted to do more with that, but I realized very rapidly that it was far too grim to actually use as a setting. I needed to do something that was also kind of a bleak, farcical comedy, as well as absolutely horrifying. And I'm a fan, going back a very long way, of a particular subgenre of fiction that may not be very familiar in America, but the classic Cold War British spy thriller. Now, the most famous exponent of that is probably John le Carré, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and etc. But there are many other authors who worked in that field, notably Len Dayton, who was my first target, author of Billion Dollar Brain, The Ipcress File, and several other books that ended up as movies. And the thing about the British spy agencies of that day is they were very low-budget, rather bureaucratic, rather bumbling, and extremely drab in their appearance. They didn't have big budgets. James Bond is almost a perfect photographic negative of what they were looking for in a recruit. They wanted the exact opposite in every respect. And it occurred to me, if you posit that magic is a branch of mathematics, you get all sorts of interesting fallout, including a magical spin-off agency of GCHQ, the British equivalent of the National Security Agency, set up to suppress computational demonology in the post-war years. A side effect of this is that any computer scientist who accidentally stumbles on the wrong theorems and doesn't get eaten by tentacle monsters may well end up being recruited and shoved in a box to work for the government. And my protagonist, Bob, is very much a fish out of water. He is the incongruous, misplaced protagonist. He would be a lot more at home in a 1990s Silicon Valley.com startup than in a 1940s British government agency. So this gave me a lot of scope for comedy, because obviously this sort of guy is just not at home in a government bureaucracy. But they have nowhere else to put him. And that sort of gradually grew into a short novel, The Atrocity Archive, which gradually, how to put it, it slouched into publication. It didn't appear with a bang. It first got serialized in a short-lived Scottish science fiction magazine in 2002. Then an American small press publisher decided they quite like it, but could I write a sequel novella to pad it out to book length? This was after my agent had rejected it as too weird and cross-genre to sell. She changed her mind after the Hugo win about sequel novella. And the Hugo win generated demand for a sequel novel, and then 3 books in, my editor at Ace, who are now doing the paperbacks, said, Charlie, we've had an order from on high, from board level. All series of 3 or more books have to have a series title. I'm going to call this The Laundry Files. What do you think? I've been embarrassed by that title ever since, because she was clearly riffing off Jim Butcher's Dresden Files. She edited Jim as well.